The night he finally opened up to me changed everything. Until then, I thought I understood my place in his life. I believed I was just a secret, something thrilling that would eventually fade. But as he sat across from me, eyes heavy with exhaustion, his voice carried a weight I had never heard before. He told me his marriage was no longer a marriage at all. He described a house full of silence, a bed that felt like a prison, a wife who no longer saw him as a man, but only as a provider. His words were sharp with pain, but underneath them was something softer, something raw. He said that with me he felt alive again. He said I wasn't just a distraction, I was the only part of his life that felt real. I didn't know how to respond. My chest tightened, my mind screamed at me to stop this before it went any further. But my heart betrayed me. The idea that he saw me as more than a hidden escape filled me with a dangerous kind of hope. He wasn't just confessing his frustrations, he was confessing his love. And I sat there, wondering why. Why me? Why risk his entire life, his reputation, his family, for someone like me? It would have been easier if he had kept it physical, if he had drawn the line at passion. But his words made everything heavier. Suddenly, our nights weren't just about desire. They turned into long conversations about fears, dreams, and futures we both pretended not to imagine. He stopped rushing home after we were together. Instead, he lingered, holding me close, speaking about things he had never shared with anyone else. The way he looked at me changed too. It wasn't hunger anymore, it was tenderness, it was commitment. It was something I had no defense against. But love inside betrayal is not pure. It's poisoned by the very foundation it stands on. Every kiss was shadowed by guilt, every laugh tangled in the knowledge that what we had was built on lies. I wanted to believe him when he said he loved me, but part of me wondered if I was just the reflection of everything his marriage lacked. Maybe I wasn't the woman he loved. Maybe I was just the woman who reminded him of who he wished he could be. The risks grew bigger. He stopped caring about how obvious it looked when he asked for me in meetings that didn't require my presence. He called me at work just to hear my voice, ignoring the stares from others when I smiled too quickly at the sound of his name. He began showing up unannounced, slipping into my apartment without warning, clinging to me as if the world outside didn't exist. And with every reckless move, the walls around us thinned. I told myself I should end it, that no matter how much he claimed to love me, this was a disaster waiting to happen. But every time I tried to pull away, he pulled me back with words I couldn't ignore. He told me I was his future, that he was willing to burn his old life just to build a new one with me. I wanted to resist, but part of me wanted to believe it too. I wanted to believe I wasn't just a secret. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. 5 words: cold, direct, and terrifying. "You're not as invisible as you think." My hands trembled as I read them again and again. Someone knew, someone had been watching, and suddenly his love confession felt less like a dream and more like a countdown to disaster. What began as a secret arrangement quickly became something I couldn't control. The stolen hours grew bolder. At first it was hidden hotel rooms, but then it shifted to moments that risked everything. Him slipping into my office with the door closed, his hand brushing mine in the middle of a crowded meeting, his voice lingering longer than it should when he said my name. I kept telling myself this was reckless, but every boundary I tried to rebuild crumbled the moment he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. Business trips became excuses. He would insist I travel with him, always under the pretense of needing my organizational skills. But in reality, those trips became a world where nothing else existed. No wife, no office politics, no judgment. Just us. I remember how he booked 2 separate rooms for appearances, but only ever used one. Nights that should have been about reviewing presentations turned into hours of whispered laughter, quiet confessions, and moments that made me forget who he was to the rest of the world. What terrified me wasn't the passion, it was the tenderness. He began noticing things no one else cared about. He remembered how I liked my coffee, the way I always carried a notebook filled with private thoughts, the fact that I hated the silence of hotel rooms and always left the TV on, even if I wasn't watching. These weren't the gestures of a man simply looking for an escape. These were the gestures of someone who was slowly, deliberately building something deeper. And with every detail he held onto, I felt myself being pulled further into a story I didn't know how to stop. At the office, people began to notice things. His constant need for me, the way his gaze lingered, the sudden promotions and bonuses that seemed to have no explanation. Whispers started. Some colleagues looked at me differently, as if they suspected I was more than just efficient at my job. The gossip never reached him, or if it did, he didn't care. If anything, his carelessness grew bolder. He didn't just hide me anymore. He wanted me near him, wanted me seen, as though the risk only fueled his need. The guilt gnawed at me. Every time he left my bed and went home to her, I told myself this was temporary, that he would tire of me, that eventually he would go back to his life, and I would be nothing more than a memory. But then he would call late at night, his voice softer than I had ever heard it in the boardroom, telling me he couldn't sleep without hearing mine. And suddenly I didn't feel like a placeholder. I felt like the reason he was still breathing. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was supposed to be a secret, a distraction, an escape from the monotony of his marriage. But instead, he started to make me believe I was something more. I started to see it in the way he looked at me, not with lust, but with something dangerous, something like love. And when I overheard him on the phone, his voice low and strained, arguing with his wife, my heart froze. Because in the middle of that fight, he said my name, and that single slip made me realize this affair was no longer hidden in the dark. It was leaking into the daylight, threatening to destroy everything.